Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles constitutional human rights and legal issues, bringing you information and analysis. My name is Dumila Matez. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion today by calling us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights Recourse. Alternatively, email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. We continue our analysis of the ANC policy documents in preparation for their policy conference to be held at the end of June. Today on Rights and Recourse, we are analysing the peace and stability policy proposals of the ANC destined for their policy conference to be held at the National Exhibition Centre in Johannesburg. To discuss today's topic, we are joined in the studio by the chairperson of the Peace and Stability Subcommittee, the Honourable Minister of Defence and Military Veterans, Ms. Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula. Welcome to the programme, ma'am.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
The very first question I want to ask, it's a very cumbersome document, this document of the policy document, and it's very difficult to choose. We'll have to skirt very carefully as to what do we ask, what do we leave out for a later time. Okay. I notice the Peace and Stability Subcommittee is the only committee that has given a consolidated progress report on the 53rd National Conference resolution. Is this by sheer coincidence?
Well, I think it is, but on our side it was a deliberate attempt to sketch to our members, to society, the proposals and locate them within the context where we are today. What progress has been made, significant progress made since 1994, and where we make proposals on review of that policy, people need to understand the angle from which we're coming. So we indeed have to locate whatever proposals we are making within the overall context of what is happening in the peace and stability environment.
I notice also that the document concentrated a great deal on the 2015 defence review. How different is this review to the 1998 one?
Okay, let me start by saying the defence review, remember the last defence review was done between 1996 and 1998. And that was a first defence review in a post-apartheid South Africa. This is our second defence review since democracy. And it's important for any country to go through a defence review process for purpose of understanding the current conjuncture, to understand what your needs are, the state of the defence force itself, its capabilities, and where you need to improve. And I think that for any country to be able to budget properly for its defence force, it's important that you get independent analysts to come in, of course, who understand the defence sector, to do that kind of assessment and advise you about what best to do to improve the operations of the defence force.
We have heard you, ma'am, on several occasions, several of your budget votes, lamenting the fact that the Defence Force is underfunded, and in the policy document, again, you raise the fact that the budget cannot fully fund the implementation of the Defence Review.
Oh, yes.
With many competing requirements, what does the policy document propose how the Department of Defence uses its budget, or how probably National Treasury should allocate funding to the Department?
Let me start by saying it is true that all of us understand there are competing interests, there are competing needs in South Africa, and everybody is scrambling for a slice of cake from this small budget, fiscus of the Republic. However, in the context of the South African National Defence Force, we come from a position that you may talk about your economic growth, you can talk about radical economic transformation, inclusive economy growth. If you do not ensure that all of those things are done in an environment where peace and stability prevails, you're not going to succeed. And therefore, when we make some of the demands or appeals which we are making with regards to the budget of the Defence Force. It is in that context that, yes, government has its priorities. Government has a program. Government has a vision of improving the lives of South African people. And in order for you to improve the socio-economic conditions of South Africans, you've got to make sure that this happens in an environment of peace and stability.
I have a quote that I like very much that I've used over the last time that I've been doing these reviews around the policy conference. That is a quote from President O.R. Tambo, who says in some quote, I'll take it halfway, where he says, the enemy is not necessarily doing everything wrongly. You can learn from the enemy.
True.
The National Party government, to augment the budget of the Defence Force then, albeit they were doing it for ulterior motives, they issued non-taxable bonds. Did this ever cross the mind of the subcommittee?
No. It's not something we've considered. The National Party government had to do it. They had an obligation to do it. Firstly, it was under sanctions. Two, they had a huge defense budget. They had to do all manner of things within that budget, including invading the frontline states, deal with issues of your so-called Swat-Khefar. So the priorities of that government are really different from the priorities of our government, and we differ even in the manner in which we do things. However, President O.R. Tambo, when he said that there may be things which we'll have to take from the government of the racist regime, I think he was correct. Personally, when I look at the entire peace and stability environment, I sometimes say there are certain things we've done away with, which probably we could have kept and take from and live from. And I believe that, for instance, for me, I don't compromise on issues of discipline. The military itself, the Defence Force by its nature, is a disciplined institution, okay? So for me, issues of enforcement of that discipline within that environment are things I always worry about. Right now we have the military discipline bill, which is before Parliament, which will pave the way for us to enhance discipline and enforce discipline within the South African National Defence Force. But it will also empower the Chief of the National Defence Force to have a tighter control on issues of command and control. The way things are post-democracy, of course, there's the human rights culture, which is a very good human rights culture. But let me tell you, you cannot deal with issues of transgressions, for instance, in the Defence Force in the same way that you deal with them in other institutions. There are certain limits within the Defence Force. There are certain things you have to do in a particular way. And I'm therefore saying, please, and people should not understand me to be saying we should bring back the draconian manner of doing things. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying, for instance, on issues of discipline in the military, I don't compromise. There is no Defence Force which does not have military. Because if you have indisciplined soldiers, you're likely to compromise security and you become the weakest link.
Now that you raised that, Minister, my
so
apology.
OR was correct.
Now that you raised that, my apology, there's been a group of soldiers who have been on suspension for a long time. What's happened to that case?
Which one?
The case of the soldiers who were laid off and because of discipline.
We have many cases of ill-discipline. Some of them, people will be suspended with pay, and of course most of the time, because that's what our laws require of us to do. But in some instances, of course, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, for instance, there were peacekeepers who committed some irregularity, and the moment they came in here, we dismissed them immediately. So, yes, there are different cases. We have ways of dealing with those, but I do want to repeat that you can't deal with that environment in the same way that you deal with an ordinary teacher who stayed away from home, from school. and stayed at home.
I think there are military courts, isn't it?
Yes, we do have military courts. We do have military judges appointed by the minister. And, but of course, they also, remember, perform within the overall constitutional framework, but also legislation.
Minister, how important was the inclusion of the military veteran section within the department?
You know, very, very important, because since 1994 to 2007, when the decision was taken at the Polokwane conference, there was no attention whatsoever given to military veterans. It is only at the conference in Polokwane where a decision was taken that we should establish a department which would service military veterans. In other words, this is an entity, this is a grouping of people which has been completely marginalized, completely isolated, and were not accessing some of the benefits your ordinary military veterans should have, really. If you look around, even within our own region, you do have departments which have been established to assist war veterans. In our case, nothing was happening. So yes, the establishment of that department and the subsequent passing of the legislation, which allows for us to make certain provisions to improve their lives, has indeed worked a great deal, but that is not without its own faults. It has its own challenges, starting with the very database of military veterans. And by the way, when I talk about military veterans, I'm not talking about a database of non-statutory military veterans. I'm talking about both statutory and non-statutory forces. Even though in the main, the people who are destitute, the people who require our services are your former non-statutory forces, military veterans.
The Air Force has always been seen as a flagship of the South African Defence Force, and it will be commemorating its centenary anniversary in 2021. We'd imagine that preparations are already underway.
Well, yes, within the Air Force itself, yes. But of course, it has always been seen as a flagship, yes. It does have its own challenges. And I'm sure when we, even in the Defence Review itself, I'm sure there would be a section that deals with that. Part of the challenge is capabilities for the South African National, the Air Force itself. For instance, we require a strategic airlift capability. We do not have. We have only 3 C-130s which are functional. So it is not much as it is a flagship department, as you describe it, but it is not without its challenges, such as the one I've just alluded to. But also it has always been seen in some circles, perceived to be a white-dominated sector of our defense force, and of course we've tried very hard to make sure that it represents the demographics of this country.
Well, if you'd like to join us in today's discussion, you can call us on 011-714-5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
We tell you about Africa's social media and technology landscape.
21st century economies rely on technology to truly thrive.
We have quite a comprehensive portfolio of interventions in the tech entrepreneurship space.
And Africans are using tech and social media to solve the continent's unique challenges.
App Nigeria is an online marketplace.
Radio Vibe is a social media platform for radio music.
That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
Welcome back as we continue our discussion on the policy document on peace and stability, the policy document of the ANC, with the chairperson of the subcommittee, Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula. Minister, what should the role of the South African Navy be in combating terrorism, pirating and illegal fishing on our shores, which undercuts African economic development and exacerbates food security?
Okay. Let me start by saying, firstly, South Africa has one of the longest coastlines. Secondly, the SADC, the region itself, has what is called a maritime security strategy. And part of that maritime security strategy is obviously the security of our shores. Currently, we are in the Mozambican Channel, together with 2 other countries, namely Mozambique and Tanzania, taking responsibility for the patrols on the Mozambican Channel. Reason for that being, you'll recall that up there in the Horn of Africa, there's been a lot of piracy activities in the past few years. And as I'm talking to you, you will not hear that the pirates have actually come down to our shores. It is because of the existence of that team of soldiers which is located in that area. So we've managed through that operation to deter pirates from coming down to our shores. On the western coast, we are discussing with Namibia and Angola ways of securing our western coastal area. So yes, there is a lot which needs to be done. The safety of South Africa, the maritime of South Africa, depends on capabilities we have within the Navy. In other words, as we talk about patrolling the borderline, you're talking about patrol vessels. And of course, in the Defense Review, which you have read, you will see that there are specific equipment which they say we do need in order for our Navy to meet this demand which we've made on it. So if you talk about maritime security, we concern ourselves, of course, we are the ones who have the responsibility to look after the coastline and the borderline of the Republic of South Africa. So obviously, we then require everything that which we can use for purposes of preventing, including terrorist activities from happening in South Africa. You've mentioned that, and I should say that we are fortunate, and South Africans should not take the Defence Force for granted and take our safety for granted. We're fortunate that we've not had acts of terror in the Republic of South Africa. I'm saying this because we're not an island. We're part of the global village where there have been terror attacks in different countries. In South Africa itself, we've seen recruitment of young people, for instance, to go and join ISIS. We've deported some of the elements who are problematic in the Republic of South Africa, who are not necessarily South Africans, and send them back to their countries. In other words, that task of patrolling and securing the borderline, including the coastal borderline, is a very important aspect of our work. And in order for us to do so, there are certain things we need, hence the call on people to really rally behind the Defence Force so that we can have a rise in our budget.
Well, let's take this call from Kay from KwaZulu-Natal. Kay, remember, we are talking about the ANC policies, proposed policies for the National Policy Conference. Good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to the Defence Minister. I'm really concerned of the Minister stating that she is concerned of the state security, right? And when we look back many years, with all due respect, Minister, when we look back the Waterkloof air base, our key point, national key point, a private Gupta airplane has landed there, and nothing has been done about it. So it's my concern as a former firefighter, and we've been semi-military roles in the fire department, and that is my concern. With all due respect, Minister, can you please give me a proper answer on that?
I will.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you, Kay. Kay mentioning there, I just want to make sure that he doesn't confuse what you are saying about the security of South Africa and the security of the state. Yes, the state needs to be secured, but are you able to answer that question?
Yes, I think it's important for me to clarify that, because he says nothing happened after the landing of an aircraft at Waterkloof, a private aircraft, with people who were attending a wedding. But I'm sorry, with due respect, Kay, you are making a mistake. In that, when the report came out, we were quick to establish what is called a board of inquiry within the South African National Defence Force. And that board of inquiry came out with a report and actually singled out certain people who were involved in that activity. Not only have we dealt with this matter, actually the people are now out of the system of the South African National Defence Force. So to say that an irregularity occurred at a national key point, such as the Waterkloof Air Base, and then say nothing has happened, I'm sorry, there is no truth to it. You probably did not hear about the board of inquiry. You probably have not even had access or read the findings of that board of inquiry and recommendations of the board of inquiry. But it was a public matter.
Minister, let's go back to peacekeeping. You mentioned that South Africa the document does talk about South Africa's involvement in peacekeeping, especially on the continent, and how strategic this peacekeeping is for the economic development of the continent. We know we have this peacekeeping mandate given to us by the UN and the AU. Are the reported budget constraint? With a reported budget constraint, can we meet this mandate?
Well, we have an obligation to meet the requirements of the United Nations Security Council. We are part of that multilateral forum. Equally, we have an obligation to meet the requirements of the African Union. So yes, the demands are quite high on us, but of course the resources are not there for us to do it. But have we ever declined to go on a peacekeeping force? No, we've not. We are in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we've been there for years, by the way. Not only are we there for peacekeeping, we are also part of a peace enforcement unit in the eastern part of the DRC, which is called the Force Intervention Brigade. We did not say no because we have resource constraints. Yes, we've been there. By the way, we were also in Darfur, in Sudan, for quite some time, for some years. And since when last year, June, we've now withdrawn from Darfur. So the fact that we have resource constraints has still not stopped us from being part of the peacekeeping activities, precisely because we recognize the importance of peacekeeping and the positive impact it will have in the continent for economic growth and prosperity.
The policy document also makes reference to what needs to happen within the police force. There have been numerous complaints about the lack of training of police in South Africa. Or has this area improved over the years?
To be honest, there's nothing which points to the fact that our police are not properly trained. Where you've seen police in action, dedicated policemen and women, right? They've done extremely well. However, we do have a small number, maybe a drop in the ocean, of policemen and women who have behaved in a manner such that our people have now started questioning the training they receive. It has nothing to do with training. It really has to do sometimes with attracting bad elements in any system. And I think that is the case even in the South African police.
The Statistician General, Dr. Padili Khotla, reported recently that our unemployment rate has grown extensively over the last couple of months. But it would seem to me many of these people we must avoid the fact that we draw many of the unemployed people into the police and the army because they are not necessarily dedicated to be policemen and army and soldiers.
Well, how do you make that kind of determination? But truth of the matter is, anyone who's employed by the state, particularly those who join the state organs, such as the police, the defense force, the intelligence services, go through vigorous, and I mean it, vetting. Okay? So it is not just a checking, doing a preliminary screening. It's a vigorous process of vetting. However, somehow, people, bad elements manage to go through the system. Yes, what is important is that we put mechanisms in place to identify some of the rotten elements, even if they are already within the system. And I think in the Defence Force, that's what we've been doing. That is why 2 years ago, when 27 of our young people who were into their 3rd year in the Defence Force, when they committed what we regarded as a serious, a gross indication of negligent behavior, we were quick to remove them because we know that it stigmatized the entire South African National Defence Force, and yet this is an entity which is supposed to be respected by everybody. It's an entity which is supposed to be non-partisan. It's an entity which is supposed to enjoy the support of the nation and the support from our people. So when there are such elements within the Defence Force, we flush them out because we do not want to be perceived as a force which is indisciplined.
Let's take this call from Tabiso in the Free State. Tabiso, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Afternoon, Dumisa. I just want to talk to Mama Pisa regarding, in fact, regarding the borders, our borders. It's long, overdue that now they've decided at least, to put security on our borders and make sure that our borders are well protected and secured after a very long time.
Thank you very much,
Number two, I just want to congratulate them on that. And then thinking also about the military veterans. It's long overdue as well, also to think that, to think about them, at least to take them seriously, that those people, they contributed a lot during, apartheid times. But my problem is one about this.
Thank you, Tabiso. Tabiso, thank you very much. We're going to take another call. Chris from Johannesburg, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call and greetings to the Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, my first input to the Minister about the review, this review, may it be highlighted that the members who are deployed, they are contributing through the entities that are employing them external to the GDP, because it seems as if the overemphasis is on the burden of resources. And also on a point of bringing the Cuban technicians, it's a well done movement by the Defence Force, because those people are really empowering our technical capability. On the third matter, the last one that I want to ask the Minister, may please also try to expand the meaning of a veteran. Also, it must include the elderly people who are still bound in the uniform, so that they can also copy when they leave the system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. If you'd like to join us, like Chris and Tabiso, you can call us on our studio line on 011-714-5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights Recourse. You can also send us an email on rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News live at 10:00 hours across all Central African regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we continue analysing the policy document, Peace and Stability of the ANC. Minister Thabiso referred to the borders, looking after our borders. Yes. I saw you in Manguzi with the SANDF, looking at the border there. In some places the wire was cut and people were just walking through.
Yes. True, Dumile, true. And thank you very much, Thabiso and Chris. You know, Dumile, there was a time when border control was given to the police. And for some time in South Africa, people believed that there can never be a threat. And therefore, there was a laissez-faire attitude towards issues of border control. Now, it has been brought back to the South African National Defence Force. Whereas we do have boots on the ground, but there is a challenge of infrastructure on the borderline. And there's a challenge because, remember, we are now 23 years into our democracy. Our infrastructure was neglected. Okay? Not only that, remember, during those days, apartheid days, you had an electric fence, for instance, on the borderline. When we came into power, Madiba said, we shall now lower the fence. So in the main, the fence which you find on the borderline is that which prevents animals from crossing over, and not so much the kind of secure fencing which you had during those days. And as I'm talking to you, when I talk about infrastructure, I'm not necessarily talking about fencing, for instance. We may use fence, we may use UAVs. Currently, we have 15 companies which are deployed to the borderline out of 22 companies which should be there. But because of this challenge of resources, we can't go beyond the 15, we are still at 22. Even though we've now made an undertaking that we're going to be pushing through for the complete deployment of the 22 companies because of the porousness of our borders. Yeah, our people are beginning to feel that part of what contributes to the kind of crime we see has to do with porous borders. Not suggesting, though, that it is foreign nationals who are committing that kind of crime in South Africa, no, but it contributes to crime. Now, Thabiso then mentions the military veterans. We're quite happy, actually, and I must say that the focus of the department has been to roll out benefits to military veterans, such as provide education support to their dependents and military veterans themselves, provide medical support and burial support. But one critical element which people never talk about is that of economic empowerment. We're trying to assist military veterans to establish companies. For instance, if I may use this, last year we established what is called a National Defence Industry Council.
The NDIC.
Yes, that National Defence, which when we were directed by the Defence Review, that was in March 2016. As I'm talking to you now, we are at the tail end of formulating what is called and publishing a Defence Industry Charter. That Defence Industry Charter will allow for military veterans, for women as well, to come into the defense sector. Remember, the defense sector, industry sector, is an industry which is really still white, male dominated. But you can understand why, because this is an industry, a sector which has established during those days when South Africa was under an arms embargo. So who you find there will be your white males. And in order for us to get women into the sector and to get young black people into the sector, we've now created this charter. Now, part of the requirements we are making through that charter is for big defense industry companies to allow for the smaller ones to come in and to mentor them. And we will establish a council which will monitor compliance with that defense industry charter. So part of my preoccupation, really, I must be honest, has been you can roll out and improve the social conditions of military veterans by giving educational support, etc., etc., by giving out, together with social development, pensions. You need housing, for instance, relief. You need, though, to create a situation where military veterans can be self-sustainable. Now, once people form these companies, of course, amongst others, they will then be self-sustainable because they will be getting opportunities through the industry to to government contracts, not only in South Africa but also outside of the Republic. Chris then very quickly mentions the project with the Cubans. Yes, I'm happy. Optusano, I'm sure you've read about it. Optusano is one of those flagship projects I'm very proud of. I think we've been able to save government a lot of money. Cubans are mentoring our people, our own mechanics, our own engineering in how to take a vehicle which was abandoned, redundant, which probably at the point of selling it. They've now helped us to repair those, to refurbish, and to preserve them. So we have now trucks dating back early 70s, late 60s, which have been, they are masters in that, Cubans. Remember, they've been under sanctions for a long time. So if you go to Cuba, you'll see them driving cars of the 50s, of the 60s. It is because of they've had to develop survival skills and techniques. And in this case, they've actually assisted us a great deal. We saved a lot of money. Not only have we saved a lot of money, there's been a lot of skills transfer to our own young people who are in the South African National Defence Force. So that Optusano is one of our flagship programs. Lastly, Chris raises a matter of support even to the elderly members of the South African National Defence Force, those who are still serving. Well, just to say, Chris, that when you are still serving, you cannot be called a military veteran. But on the other hand, Dumile, we need to understand, for instance, there's a recommendation on my table, which was put forward by the Defence Force Service Commission. They need to de-link rank from salary.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Because you have a number of people who've gone into the system, who were integrated, who are elderly, who are probably left with a year or two before they retire, right? But in terms of the package they receive, it will not make a significant dent in their pensions when they leave the South African National Defence Force. So we are now looking at possibilities of how best to de-link your rank, because if you are a corporal and you are left with a year to leave the South African National Defence Force, earning a salary of a corporal, right? What it means is that when you go out, you leave the system, indeed you are going to battle to survive. So we're trying now, we want to de-link that salary from the rank. But obviously, once you leave the system, the South African National Defence Force, immediately, by virtue of having been in the South African National Defence Force, you automatically go into the database of military veterans. So you form part of the military veterans, and therefore we have an obligation to assist you. We have an obligation to roll out the benefits which we are rolling to the current military veterans who come from the non-statutory forces. We will now have an obligation to roll out those to those who are exiting our system.
Let's take this call from Musa from KwaZulu-Natal. I have a question that I'm burning to ask Musa. What is your question?
Honorable, first of all, dignified presenter, Honorable Minister, thank you for taking my call. Listening to the Minister's presentation there, it seems as though that the state is taking up a lot of responsibility, especially in terms of veterans from the Defence Force side. I've heard you say that you're trying to roll out mechanisms where you are going to train, establish trades and trade so that they can trade with the Department of Defence Force. Shouldn't that be a responsibility for DTI and not the Defence Force? Secondly, I heard you say that there's just a handful of rotten eggs in the police force, which is besmirching the name of the majority of the police force. But just last week, Minister Balula said that as much as they have good policemen, they have just the same number of rotten policemen that are in the force. In terms of training of our SANDF, you know, we had the scenario where we had soldiers taking things and being dumped at the City Hall at Cape Town. I mean, how does that portray us as a country which wants to ensure that the Defence Force is there to uphold the law and where they would be monitored, in this case, make us feel safe? In terms of the veterans of the Defence Force, I think they have a limit as to where the demand should end. Once you become a veteran, you're entitled to pension payouts and so forth. Now the demand is becoming over and over, and there seems to be a state dependency. South Africa is becoming a country where the entire nation is becoming dependent on the state for everything. And I'm not sure on
any state.
Yes, Honorable Minister. Also, we are coming to a state where we are now being taken to a Cold War, and I'm not whether this would fall under the ambit of the Defence Force to unlock it, because if you read these emails scenario that's coming into the country from outside world. I mean, the Daily Maverick is not a South African paper. How are this information leaving this country? Number one. Number two, we have something called the National Intelligence also, which falls under the Defence Force. It seems as though that the ANC policies is not capable enough to run our country or to deal with issues within its rank and file in terms of leadership when our country is being captured.
Well, thank you, Musa. I think you have a whole lot of things lined up there. They will be available next time when the Minister comes, when we're going to discuss the Defence Review document. Probably now we should get to try and answer your questions. Okay. One of the things Musa was raising there was the issue of training people or making them business people. Shouldn't that you have a division run by Armscor and Denel? What role are they playing in this, in the NDIC?
Okay. Well, I'm not saying we are going to be training, but we should facilitate all of those things for military veterans. We have an obligation to do so because we have a department which is supposed to make sure that the lives of military veterans are better. Now, so Musa says it's the responsibility of trade and industry. You are very correct. But I have a responsibility of ensuring, as I move around, even as I interact with other government departments, that we talk about what military veterans can benefit. In whatever I see, what is it that military veterans can gain out of it? So even when I talk to DTI, even on the matter of the charter right now is with DTI, precisely because we want to make sure that we are in line with the BBEE codes which they have outlined. On the matter of limits to demands, you're right. I mean, but truth of the matter is that we're dealing here with, we're trying to level the field with imbalances of the past. We still have an obligation. You're right, when you exit the Defence Force, you get your pensions, etc., etc. But it also depends at what level are you leaving the Defence Force. I just use an example of a corporal, right? Just an ordinary troop, for instance, leaves the Defence Force. Really, if you look at the pension they have, it's it will not take them. Yes, so you've got to do something to make sure that the people who are leaving the South African National Defence Force do not feel like they don't become, they don't join the ranks of the poor in that sense, or the ranks, they join the ranks of the unemployed admittedly by virtue of their age, right? Because they shall have pensioned from the Defence Force. But you don't want to add on to the statistics of those people who will have to go to social development to receive grants. So there are certain things you can do whilst people are still in the system. There's a matter of the emails. I don't know, whilst I don't want to address myself to the matter of the emails, but I do want to say that there's a big thing called cybersecurity lately. Oh yes. Worldwide. I think it's addressed in the document. Only the other day we were talking about, we woke up one morning and read about how systems of well-developed countries had been hacked into. And therefore, South Africa too is not immune to that. In fact, the JCPS cluster, in other words, the Justice, Crime and Prevention cluster, for instance, has developed a strategy on cybersecurity. Not only have we developed a strategy on cybersecurity, we even know where which entity should be located. For instance, the Defence Force will be responsible for the command center of that the cybersecurity command center. So there is something we're doing as a country, because we know we're not immune to those. We know we have enormous challenges, and I don't want to comment on the hacking of the emails, the current thing which is all over the place. Safe to say, we're doing something about on issues of cybersecurity. But not only that, I'm avoiding talking about it, Dumile, because really at some point, somebody has to take up the responsibility of establishing the veracity of these emails, and whether in fact they are authentic or not. Before you have done that, I think I'm very limited in responding to that.
I mean, somebody would say that that capability is within the security cluster.
Mm-hmm. Well, security, yes. I mean, you have the Department of State Security. But remember, I said to you, on issues of cybersecurity, it can't be the sole preserve of one entity. It has to cut across all security departments. We have a responsibility of dealing with this matter. And as I mentioned earlier on, the JCPS cluster is in the process of developing the strategy. But you mentioned the rotten apples or potatoes within the South African Police Service. Well, like you would find them anyway. And yes, the minister is correct to say that you do find rotten elements. And I know that a number of people, and I think even this morning when we had a media briefing, some people are concerned about the heavy-handedness of some members of the police. Okay? And I'm saying, yes, it is true that you will find those police who are committing crime, but you cannot paint all policemen and women, those in blue, with the same brush. It's important for us to single out those who are carrying out these activities. The same applies to being heavy-handed. It's not all police who have abused South Africans. It's not all policemen and women who have been heavy-handed in dealing with issues of crime, but they have dealt with those issues, some of them in a very professional manner and have displayed high levels of maturity. And one such case, if I may say, for instance, is some of the cases which they've had to deal with of women and children who have been abused, issues of domestic violence, whereas still we have women who are pulling back, who are not coming forward with to report domestic violence. But you do have a sizable number of police men and women who are dedicated, who are committed to their work, and who display high levels of professionalism in dealing, for instance, with issues of women and children, and generally with all crimes.
Minister, I've always said here, in the few minutes we have left, I have pointed out on several occasions to the prevalence of foreign illegal miners, the zamazamas around the reef, going underground with weapons and use the disused mines. Is this not a threat to national security?
It is a big one. Illicit economy. It's a matter which we've been dealing with for the past 3 years, led by state security as a cluster. We've been dealing with this matter because it is threatening the economy of this country. It is threatening the security of the country. Remember, whereas people are talking about mines which are not used, what do you call it?
Probably we should use the word mothball for...
Well, but truth of the matter is that we are told that underneath these mines are well connected. So whereas a Zamazama may enter an abandoned mine where we are right now, there is a threat that one day some of them, or may have been, for all you care to know, ending up in areas where there is still mining being done. So in terms of our anti-crime strategy, which we will be publishing as well, this is one area which has received a lot of attention, particularly because we've had numbers of people who have died in those mines as well. There's a lot of crime being committed underneath there. For instance, we now know that there's even an effort to get young girls to go down those mines and provide services in men who are mining illegally. So we are very concerned. It is a threat to our security, but it is a big threat to our economy as well.
Quickly, Minister, without much, does South Africa conduct a terrorism threat analysis?
All the time. It's an ongoing process. It's something which is done on a regular basis. There is no way in which it's not something which state security can ignore. As I said, we are part of the global village. As I said, we are deployed in countries where there is conflict. At times, it is possible that conflict which you are flashing out in those areas may actually tiptoe and follow you into your country. So analysis on terrorism and even cooperating with those who are committed to neutralizing these forces and eradicating terrorism, we are very committed and we are determined to defend our country, to ensure that we do not have acts of terror in South Africa.
Minister, thank you very much for your time. It's been a riveting discussion. I never thought we didn't get through everything, but if you'd like to get everything, there will be a national conference, policy conference of the ANC, where all of these issues will be fleshed out. It was Comrade O.R. Tambo who warned prophetically in 1977 in Angola, comrades, you might think it is very difficult to wage a liberation struggle. Wait until you are in power. I might be dead by then. At that stage, you will realize that it's actually more difficult to keep the power than to wage a liberation war. People will be expecting a lot of services from you. You will have to satisfy the various demands of masses of our people. In the process, be prepared to learn from other people's revolutions. Learn from the enemy also. The enemy is not necessarily doing everything wrongly. You may take his right tactics and use them, to your advantage. At the same time, avoid repeating the enemy's mistakes. This has been Rights and Recourse. Please do join us next week again. You can find us on YouTube and continue to tweet. From all of us in the studio, thank you to the Minister and goodbye.